In the late 1950s and early 1960s, strange, bulky machines that looked like this started to show up in nightclubs and bars across France and Italy. Known as the Scopitone in France and the Cinebox in Italy, these machines were visual jukeboxes, successors to the American Panoram machines from 20 years earlier. Unlike the Panoram, which consisted of black and white clips with poor audio quality, the Scopitone and its competitors could present video in full color with hi-fi audio. They had greater storage capacity with a selection of up to 36 different short films, and best of all, audiences could even choose which films to watch. These devices could have delivered us into the music video age nearly 30 years before MTV. But for all of their promise, they faced unique challenges due to the nature of their medium. Bob Orlowski, a Scopitone archivist, explained to Collectors Weekly, "They had to grab people's attention from across the room. They were the only type of film I can think of that's produced for people who aren't watching them. In general, nobody is choosing to look at the Scopitone machine." Because of this reality, the filmmakers creating Scopitone films had to rely on sharp color palettes and eye-catching visuals, which often included scantily clad women doing suggestive dances. These Scopitone films combined performance with loose narrative conceits and abstract visual metaphors to create something that pretty definitively read like modern music videos. Like so much in music history, they borrowed from vaudeville and burlesque, combining cheeky comedy with suggestive, raunchy acts. Big names like Serge Gainsbourg and Johnny Hallyday made appearances on the Scopitone, and figures popped up behind the scenes, hoping to take advantage of this new medium. The most prolific of these was André Boyer, better known as Mammy Scopitone. Over the course of just a few years, Mammy Scopitone directed more than 600 Scopitone films, many of which were filmed in her own house. The rushed quality of these videos are a part of their unique charm. In her seminal 1964 essay, Notes on Camp, the cultural critic Susan Sontag declared Scopitone films to be part of the canon of camp, and it's easy to see why. The impact of this camp style on music videos to come is enormous. Scopitones and similar machines spread across Western Europe in the early 60s, highlighting local stars and beginning to embed the idea of music videos into the zeitgeist. In 1964, they jumped the Atlantic, with 500 machines being installed across America. The hype for these machines was big, with directors like Robert Altman directing Scopitones and Francis Ford Coppola throwing money behind them. A-listers like Bobby Vee and Dionne Warwick tried their hand at Scopitone films. One of the most striking American music videos to appear on the Scopitone was Nancy Sinatra's These Boots Are Made for Walkin', which sees go-go dancers stomping around a quintessentially 60s set in shiny high-heel boots. A new era had arrived in the Western world, and it looked like the music video might arrive with it. Only, it didn't really stick. Scopitone films stand as an interesting historical note, and they had a pretty big cultural impact, but they'd mostly faded by the end of the decade. Why is that? Well, it has something to do with four lads from Liverpool. Welcome to Hit Record. Expectations were high when the Scopitone hit the States, but it failed to meet them, and there's a number of reasons behind that. For one, the machines were incredibly bulky, broke frequently, and were expensive to fix. To avoid competition with jukeboxes, mini Scopitones were put in cocktail lounges and adult establishments, a decision aided by the fact that most of them were funded with mob money. The mafia ties also meant that a lot of B-rate artists with loose mob connections featured in the films. Altogether, this caused the Scopitone to miss out on the biggest, most important market of the time: teens. And that might be why, in 1965, the Beatles opted out of creating Scopitone videos and turned their attentions toward television, spelling the end of a format war before it could even begin. Throughout the early 60s, the Beatles had risen from the Liverpool dockyards to stir the UK into an epidemic of Beatlemania. Like Elvis before them, the Beatles and their management knew that the key to teenage hearts lay in attracting their eyes as well as their ears. They made their television debut in 1962 on a show called People and Places, and were soon making regular national appearances on British TV. But Beatles management had greater ambitions. The Ed Sullivan Show was a variety show that first aired on June 20th, 1948. Over the course of the 50s and early 60s, it had grown in popularity and become one of the most important and beloved shows in America. Every Sunday night, millions of Americans would tune in at 8 o'clock sharp to witness performances by the finest cultural creators in the country. Sullivan had musical guests of all persuasions on, and famously aired Elvis Presley to one of the largest audience shares in American television history. Sullivan gained a reputation as a cultural kingmaker, and the Beatles knew that his stamp of approval could launch them into the stratosphere. But Sullivan's team wasn't that interested. Previous British acts hadn't had success in the American market, and he didn't see why the Beatles would be any different. Everything changed on Halloween 1963. Ed Sullivan was flying through Heathrow Airport and witnessed Beatlemania firsthand. He realized this was Elvis all over again, but decided he could shortchange the Fab Four. He offered manager Brian Epstein a single dollar to have the Beatles perform on his show. Epstein countered with a shrewd offer, accepting a minimal show fee in exchange for 3 appearances, with top billing on each. And so, on February 9th, 1964, The Ed Sullivan Show opened, with the Beatles performing All My Loving. More than 70 million viewers tuned in to watch. The Beatles had arrived in America, and with this arrival, they had cemented television as the medium that was going to carry the cultural weight of a new youth movement. There was just one problem. The Beatles became too popular. Everywhere they went, they were mobbed by fans, a reality the band comically depicted in their 1964 feature film, A Hard Day's Night. So they devised a plan that would let them do television promotions without having to deal with the inevitable mob that appeared each time word got out they were headed to a studio. The Beatles snuck away to Twickenham Studios in November 1965 and shot 5 promotional videos: Help, I Feel Fine, We Can Work It Out, Ticket to Ride, and Day Tripper. Tony Bramwell's Magical Mystery Tours has John Lennon recalling the idea. Just think, we won't be hanging around at the BBC for hours on end when we could be sitting at home quietly taking our drugs. Artistically, these videos were more straightforward and had more in common with the panorams of the 40s than the colorful Scopatone music videos. But commercially, they served the function that music videos continue to serve to this very day, promoting new singles. The Beatles were the most famous to record this kind of promotional video, but they weren't actually the first. At the start of 1964, a new show called Top of the Pops started airing on the BBC.
Yes, it's number 1. It's Top of the Pops.
Top of the Pops was a chart review show that aired every Thursday evening. The only problem is that the charts were released on Tuesday, which meant a quick turnaround time and a hectic booking and shooting schedule as the show tried to fit in acts whose songs were rising on the chart. When an artist couldn't make a live appearance on the show, Top of the Pops would ask for a promotional video to air. One of the early examples of this was Roy Orbison's video for Pretty Woman, which leans into the simple conceit of the song and shows Orbison walking around Kensington Garden after seeing a beautiful woman walking down the street. Other acts were starting to see the potential of music videos and recording them for their own purposes. In 1964, the recently formed Moody Blues shot a video for Go Now. That video uses experimental visuals that predict those of Queen's iconic Bohemian Rhapsody a decade later. Top of the Pops was an institution throughout the 60s, but unfortunately, we can't watch many of the proto-music videos that appeared on it, thanks to a BBC policy of erasing old tapes. Similar chart shows popped up around the world, and more musicians were starting to think about short-form video content. One of the most important promotional clips filmed during this era came from Bob Dylan. During his 1965 tour of England, Dylan was followed by the documentarian D.A. Pennebaker. Dylan came up with an idea for a potential film centered around subterranean homesick blues and had Pennebaker shoot it. That video showed him holding up cue cards with selections of the song's madcap lyrics as it played in the background.
John is in the basement mixing up the medicine. I'm on the pavement thinking about the government. The man in a trench coat, badge out laid off, says he's got a bad cough, wants to get it paid off.
Dylan and Pennebaker shot 3 versions of this idea in a park, an alley, and on the roof of a hotel. Subterranean Homesick Blues is an important leap as it marks one of the first times that an artist completely did away with any pretense of performance, instead relying entirely on a clever visual conceit. It could even be seen as the birth of the lyric video, an art form that wouldn't flourish until the YouTube era. While this video was shot in 1965, it wouldn't come out until 1967, and by that point, other artists were experimenting with non-performance videos. The Kinks' 1966 song, Dead End Street, came with a dark comic movie that saw the band carrying a coffin through town, only to have a man emerge from the coffin at the end. The video ended up being banned from the BBC, marking the first in a long history of banned music videos. By now, color television was starting to take hold, which helped add a new dimension to these promotional films. One of the first acts to truly thrive on color television was the Monkees. The Monkees were manufactured teen icons, created for a sitcom that saw them frequently performing musical numbers on bright, psychedelic sets. Modeled after the Beatles, the Monkees would become youth icons in the mid-60s and go on to their own strange career as a genuine band. Meanwhile, the actual Beatles were continuing their practice of shooting promotional films. In 1966, they shot Rain and Paperback Writer, which shines in crisp color. And a year later, they'd follow this up with Strawberry Fields Forever, a bright and brilliant visual that used experimental film techniques and a strange, surreal set to reflect the psychedelic music of the song.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry Fields.
By now, a cultural and musical revolution was happening on both sides of the Atlantic. Psychedelics had taken hold and brought with them a new worldview that encouraged rule-breaking and experimentation. One of the high watermarks of psychedelic music films came in 1968, when the Beatles released their animated Yellow Submarine. Like many musical feature films before it, Yellow Submarine ostensibly has a plot, but really it serves as a vehicle for experimental animated visuals. This is a continuation of the animated legacy started by Disney and Fleischer way back at the birth of film. Yellow Submarine presents itself as a hippie reimagining of a fairy tale and sees the Beatles traversing fantastical landscapes and diving into wild musical numbers. These music breaks can stand alone as music videos and display some of the most striking visualizations of sound seen to date. For all the creative success of Yellow Submarine, it's worth noting that the Beatles weren't actually that involved in the process and mostly greenlit it for contractual reasons. But honestly, that's a reality reflected in many music videos to this day. Some of the Beatles' psychedelic contemporaries were also trying their hat at promo videos. Pink Floyd shot a number of films that displayed their sort of British schoolboy comedy. These included See Emily Play and Arnold Lane, which was originally intended for Top of the Pops, but was cut from the show when the song fell from the charts. One of the more striking Top of the Pops appearances of the day was Fire, performed by the Crazy World of Arthur Brown in 1968. This demonic video saw Arthur Brown perform in a long robe, a flaming crown, and dramatic face paint. While the music is still rooted in hippie rock, the video marks some of the earliest introduction of heavy metal aesthetics.
You're gonna burn. Fire to destroy all you've done.
By the end of the decade, the hippie movement was flaming out, but some of its disciples would completely transform music videos in the years to come. In his early career, David Bowie tried to ride the hippie wave, but had never quite broken through. In an attempt to display him to a wider audience, manager Kenneth Pitt encouraged Bowie to put together a promotional film called Love You Till Tuesday. Bowie envisioned the film as a half-hour reel with 7 songs showcasing his acting ability and distinct musical voice. But at the 11th hour, he decided he wanted to add a new segment for a song he had written inspired by 2001: A Space Odyssey. That song was, of course, Space Oddity. Bowie and director Malcolm J. Thompson put together a cinematic video paying homage to the Kubrick film. Space Oddity is quintessentially 60s in aesthetic, and it shows a more serious approach to creating cinematic videos that was just on the horizon. But it would be some time before that video saw the light of day. Thompson clashed with Pitt, and the filming of Love You Till Tuesday ran over its tiny budget. Bowie's team couldn't find anybody to buy or air the videos, and they were shelved until 1984. But that wasn't the only Space Oddity video. After Bowie and Pitt parted ways in 1971, his label saw an opportunity to shoot a new video for the song. So in 1972, they brought in legendary rock photographer Mick Rock to shoot a short promo clip. By this point, Bowie had moved on from Space Oddity and was rather disinterested in the video. He was turning his attentions more toward the glam rock movement, which had exploded in the early 70s. To that end, Bowie and Mick Rock collaborated on a number of other films, which helped establish him as a visual icon. In 1972, he sported a sharp leather jacket and painted nails in Jean Jean. A year later, he appeared with a crisp powder blue suit and dramatic makeup for Life on Mars. As a movement rooted in aesthetic, glam was a natural home for pioneers in music visuals. Acts like Sparks and Alice Cooper shot their own videos in the early to mid-70s, and it was glam rock that birthed the most important promotional film of the pre-MTV era, Bohemian Rhapsody. In the fall of 1975, Queen released their operatic masterpiece. After a slow opening week, the song began to climb the British charts and earned Queen an invitation to Top of the Pops. There was just one problem. Well, actually two. First of all, the band had scheduled a tour date when they would have appeared on the show. Secondly, and perhaps more crucially, the band felt that such a grand, experimental song would feel wrong if they mimed it, as was common practice for Top of the Pops. In 2015, Brian May shared his full feelings on the program with the BBC. Top of the Pops didn't have a good reputation among musicians. Nobody liked it, really. It always seemed like a bit of a travesty. If your music had any meaning, it seemed to trickle away when you were standing on a box in a studio with lots of kids around. But you could hardly knock it, because it was the way that records were sold. So Queen decided they would pre-record their own video to send to Top of the Pops. Like most of the promo videos at the time, Bohemian Rhapsody was thrown together in just a few hours. Director Bruce Gowers was inspired by the cover for Queen 2, an iconic photo shot by none other than Mick Rock. The video opens on that recreated shot, then cuts to a performance-based midsection, which was pretty typical for the time. But as the song enters its experimental operatic breakdown, Gowers indulges in a bit of experimentation of his own. Using entirely practical effects, he elaborated on the striking shadowy imagery, throwing in a number of simple effects to enhance the visuals. One of these had Gowers pointing his camera at a monitor, which created stunning visual feedback as Freddie Mercury sang Magnifico. Because of the rapid turnaround time needed for Top of the Pops, the video was edited in just 5 hours and sent straight to the BBC. On November 20th, 1975, Bohemian Rhapsody aired for the first time, and the music world turned on its head. Speaking to the Mirror in 2015, Gowers remembered the moment. We all sat around a TV at the editing facility with our fingers crossed, wondering whether it was going to be on. And then wham, there it was. The crazy thing is, when it aired, the fans weren't the only ones seeing it for the first time. The band were too. Audiences ate up Gowers' experimental visuals and reveled in the indulgence of the song. Bohemian Rhapsody would continue to appear on Top of the Pops week after week. When all was said and done, it sat 9 consecutive weeks at the top of the charts, and even scored the coveted Christmas #1 spot. Few industry executives had faith in Bohemian Rhapsody when it was released, but they all took notice of the success of the video. Gowers' visuals were credited with helping the unlikely hit become one of the biggest songs of the year, and suddenly, the industry saw the true commercial potential of the music video. In the wake of Bohemian Rhapsody, more and more artists started shooting promo videos. Paul McCartney appeared in Silly Love Songs, Kate Bush arrived on the scene with Wuthering Heights, and Blondie channeled the disco movement in Heart of Glass. Disco might have been the artistic movement most on top of videos by the late 70s, with acts like the Bee Gees, Gloria Gaynor, and ABBA all appearing in promo films. After the roaring success of Bohemian Rhapsody, the modern music video had well and truly arrived. All that it needed was a consistent platform. And that was right around the corner, as we'll see in the next episode of Hit Record. And with that, we have finally reached the MTV era. I'm really excited for the next episode. It's one of the most ambitious episodes of the series, talking about the early days of MTV and telling the stories of some of my personal favorite music videos ever made. If you want to check that out, you can watch it right now with no ads on Nebula. If you don't know about Nebula, well, I don't really know where you've been, but just in case, Let me tell you, Nebula is the streaming platform created by and for creators like myself. It's a place to help us make our dream projects a reality. It's got dozens of original series from all kinds of unreal creators like Lindsay Ellis, Maggie Mae Fish, Real Life Lore, and of course, it's got my own original, Polyphonic magazine. That series, in which I profile smaller artists doing cool stuff under the radar, is some of my favorite work that I've ever done. The newest original that I'm loving is The Wonder of It All, a podcast about the strange nature of fame and success. In that podcast, Harvey Danger lead singer Sean Nelson interviews creatives from all different fields about the conspicuous breakthroughs that changed their lives. The first episode, which features Adam Duritz from The Counting Crows, is up right now, and it's honestly a fascinating listen. So if any of that sounds cool to you, or if you just want to help support my channel, you can head over to go.nebula.tv/polyphonic. Following that link will get you 40% off an annual premium subscription, and it's also just the best way to help support my content and help me continue to make cool stuff. So thanks for following this series, thanks for those who already support on Nebula, and we'll see you next time.